Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror TV series named Freakish Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins at Kent High School located in a peaceful town before the apocalypse. It was Saturday when these students could have been enjoying their day off at home. However, because they broke school rules, the two classmates, Grover and Violet, were required to stay behind and perform community service under the coach's supervision. The campus was occupied by a significant number of students who were participating in club activities. As Grover and the others were engaged in their community service, the school's alarm suddenly went off. Everyone's first reaction was that it was a drill. However, the student council president candidate Natalie believed that a drill would never take place on a weekend. Grover's younger sister Mary ran to inform the coach that it wasn't a drill, but instead, a chemical factory had caught fire. After hearing this, the students immediately followed the coach to the school's emergency shelter, located in the basement of the teaching building. The enclosed space was considered a decent refuge. At first, everyone thought the alarm wasn't a significant concern. However, one of the female students received a phone call informing her that the chemical factory had just experienced an explosion. The shelter then began to shake violently, causing everyone to panic. The coach reassured everyone that the shelter was sturdy, and as long as they stayed inside, nothing bad would happen. By using their smartphones, the students were able to get a rough idea of the situation outside. The largest local chemical factory had caught fire, accompanied by a toxic gas leak. The situation was rapidly deteriorating. Grover's parents both worked at the chemical factory, but now he couldn't reach them by phone. He reassured his sister that their parents were likely not at work on the weekend and might be sleeping, not hearing the phone. As the shelter shook again, it was clear that explosions were still ongoing. One of the older students got up to leave, intending to check the situation outside. The frequency of the explosions increased, and everyone wanted to see what was happening for themselves. When they reached the entrance of the teaching building, they saw through the gates that the chemical factory had been reduced to rubble amid the explosions. After the violent shaking, the students discovered that all their phones had lost signal, possibly due to the explosion. Some people panicked even more, shouting that they wanted to go home. The more rational students tried to stop them, explaining that the factory explosion must have released toxic fumes and that going outside would be even more dangerous. However, many people didn't listen and ignored the coach's attempts to stop them, running towards the school's exit. Only Grover and a few other students chose to stay and wait to see how the situation would develop. Before long, a dark yellow smoke began to spread from the chemical factory, visibly approaching the school at a rapid pace. The remaining students knew that the fumes were definitely toxic. Under the coach's guidance, they dispersed to various locations, closing doors and windows to prevent the dense smoke from entering the building. Natalie stared out the window at the thick fog, her sense of foreboding growing stronger. The silence outside was eerily unsettling. No police cars went by, and no passers-by cried for help. Everything seemed off. The coach continually tried to call for help, but even the landline phone couldn't get through. As night fell, everyone fell asleep amidst the uneasiness. Grover had a chance to get up close and personal with his crush girl Violet, but she remained indifferent towards him. Approaching midnight, Grover was awakened by footsteps. He followed the sound and discovered something lying in a classroom. It turned out to be a fellow student resting alone. After clearing up the misunderstanding, the student, Diesel, headed to the bathroom to freshen up. As he approached the door, a pale-faced student suddenly appeared, mumbling that everyone was dead. Grover quickly escorted him to the shelter. Everyone recognized that this student had left the school earlier in the day. They were all curious about what he had experienced, but his feverish state and blurred consciousness prevented him from answering any questions. At that moment, another student who had left earlier returned, exhibiting similar symptoms. As more and more students returned, all of them were placed in the shelter to rest. Violet and the others grew more curious about what had happened outside and where the others had gone. Fearing the worst, a top student in the group named Barrett decided to take action. They urgently needed to understand the situation outside, so he set out to repair an old radio stored in the shelter. During college, he had made millions developing software, so his intelligence was not in question. He guessed that the rescue team would prioritize the chemical factory and would take a long time to reach the school. While everyone else was busy in the shelter, Diesel ventured alone into the teaching building. Worried about the possibility of danger intruding, he began to patrol the area. Natalie also left the shelter. She felt that the returning students might have contracted a disease, and staying in the confined space with them could lead to infection. She went upstairs to get some fresh air. The coach shared her concerns and instructed the students to leave the shelter, saying that he would look after the patients alone. Once Grover and the others had left, the coach lay down on an empty bed. Unbeknownst to him, one of the patients suddenly sat up, showing the terrifying transformation into a zombie-like creature called Freak. Elsewhere, a student named Sean pulled his girlfriend into a storage room, intending to engage in some chilling but smelly activities. However, she was too scared to cooperate, and the two left disappointed. As they approached the door, a freak suddenly lunged at them. Fortunately, Sean managed to fight off the freak with a wooden plank and his strong muscles. Both he and his girlfriend Zoe were left in shock. On their way back to the classroom, they ran into Grover and his sister, who were gathering food. Sean and Zoe told them about their encounter. Grover found it hard to believe and decided to consult the coach. When they arrived at the shelter, they discovered several freaks feasting on the coach's body. It was clear that the returning patients had all become freaks. Grover and the others were horrified and prepared to flee when the freaks noticed them. Grover quickly grabbed his sister and retreated from the shelter, locking the door behind them just before the freaks could escape. Afterward, they ran to tell the others about the freaks. It took everyone a while to accept the existence of the undead, and they were all in a panic. Some wanted to leave immediately, but Barrett insisted that the outside might be even more dangerous. Violet agreed, pointing out that everyone who had turned into a freak had come from outside. There might be a virus in the air. Barrett advised everyone to stay indoors and seal the doors and windows. However, if they wanted to survive longer, they needed to block all entrances and ensure that there were no other freaks in the school building. As everyone split into pairs to carry out the plan, Grover noticed that something was off with his sister's expression. Under questioning, she finally admitted that she had been bitten by a freak in the shelter. In fear, Grover went to the medical room alone to get some disinfectant for her wound. But before he could return, Natalie found Grover's sister and asked her to help collect food from the cafeteria. Unable to refuse, she joined Natalie in the cafeteria. Suddenly, Grover's sister felt hungry and even detected what Natalie had eaten earlier that morning. Natalie was astonished, but the girl became anxious, realizing that her body was undergoing strange changes. She went to the sealed door and saw a freak in the distance, as if it was saying something to her. Fortunately, Grover appeared in time and interrupted her wild thoughts. He quickly pulled his sister into a classroom and rebandaged her wound, reassuring her it was just a small injury and would not lead to infection. Meanwhile, Diesel, who had sealed all the entrances, accidentally discovered that Natalie was secretly hoarding food. She explained that she was fat and needed more food than others, and Diesel soon realized she was pregnant. After her continuous pleading, he agreed to help her keep the secret. By now, Barrett had successfully assembled a walkie-talkie, but no one responded to his calls. Natalie, in charge of food distribution, told everyone that the collected food would last for 2 weeks. Unexpectedly, Mary interrupted her, saying they wouldn't last that long because there were numerous freaks hidden in the fog outside that could break in at any time. Her words only sent more chills down everyone's spine. Later, Mary went to the music room to practice her violin as usual, but accidentally hurt her finger and couldn't help tasting it. As time went on, Mary's face grew paler, and she became increasingly sensitive to sound. She overheard Barrett communicating with someone via walkie-talkie in the hallway. Barrett had a secret he didn't want anyone to know, so he chased after the eavesdropper. Following the figure, he found it was Mary, who was on the verge of going mad. Luckily, Grover arrived in time to stop his sister from losing control. Seeing her condition, Grover knew his sister was close to turning into a freak. At everyone's request, he isolated her. Mary finally faced the truth and asked her brother to kill her. Grover couldn't bear to do it and instead tied her to a bed. But no one expected the transformation to happen so quickly. When Grover returned to her room, she had disappeared without even her hormone trace. As he stood there bewildered, the now zombified Mary suddenly lunged at her brother, who was caught off guard. But he reacted pretty quick. He grabbed a bottle and knocked her down, then kicked her away like an adult toy. Grover quickly closed the door and shouted his sister's name through the glass, with crocodile tears in his eyes. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the distance. The freak sister heard it and instinctively dashed off. Grover, not wanting his sister to cause more trouble, hurriedly chased after her. But in the blink of an eye, the freak had disappeared. At that moment, Sean was playing basketball with his friend when he suggested they go check on his girlfriend, leaving his buddy alone on the court. The friend didn't notice the blood-red eyes watching him intently. Grover was unable to find his sister and had no choice but to inform everyone. Diesel immediately decided they should split into pairs to find the freaks so no one could sleep soundly. Diesel partnered with Natalie and took good care of her. To not overexert or endanger her, he placed her in a separate classroom. Violet and Barrett were a team. During their conversations, she discovered that he knew a lot about her. Upon questioning, she learned that Barrett had actually looked up the files of all survivors. Violet panicked because she had too many dark secrets in her past. Of course, he now knew all her dark secrets, except for her naked body. The files clearly stated that Violet once stole chemical substances from a lab, and Barrett recognized them as key ingredients for making explosives. A few days later, there was a massive explosion at a chemical plant, and he deduced that Violet caused the disaster. Violet was furious, cursed at him, and stormed off like a mad cow. Another pair was Sean and his girlfriend Zoe. They discovered a pool of blood in the gym's locker room. Sean told Zoe to stay put while he cautiously investigated. Zoe heard noises in the adjacent hallway and saw the zombified Mary feasting. She screamed in terror as the freak slowly approached her. Desperate, she climbed over the lockers and happened to meet her boyfriend, who came to her rescue. He bravely pushed the freak away and escaped the locker room with Zoe, locking the hallway door behind them, finally escaping danger. Not long after, Grover arrived, having heard the commotion. He tried to wake his sister, but it was futile. Zombie Mary chased Grover relentlessly until they reached a basement storeroom. With nowhere left to run, Grover repeatedly threw her down and quickly withdrew, locking his sister inside. Soon, all the survivors gathered. Sean, furious, wanted to kill Mary, as his friend had been killed by her. Grover stepped in to stop him, arguing that his sister was just sick and there might be a cure outside. However, everyone else disagreed with his approach. Only Barrett came forward to plead for Grover, asking to wait and not kill her yet. This temporarily quelled Sean's anger. Grover then went to the music room where his sister often practiced, feeling heartbroken. Violet came to comfort him, assuring him it wasn't his fault. Meanwhile, Barrett went to the room where Zombie Mary was imprisoned, carrying a flamethrower. He clearly had ulterior motives for keeping Mary alive. When Grover came to visit his sister again and saw the flamethrower and burn marks on her body, he instantly knew Barrett was responsible. He confronted him about what he had done. Barrett explained it was just an experiment to find the freak's weakness, and now he knew they feared fire. Grover couldn't forgive such actions, but others understood Barrett's motives, all for survival. Barrett even asked everyone's opinion on whether to continue the experiment. Most people raised their hands in agreement. Disheartened, Grover went to the storeroom by himself, prepared to end his sister's undead existence. He'd rather have her dead than caged and experimented on by others. But in the end, he couldn't bring himself to do it. By chance, Diesel passed by. Grover asked him to help him end it all. Together, they sent the zombified sister into the fog outside the school building. On the other side, Sean started acting strangely. Clearly, the death of his friend had taken a massive toll on him. He began to hallucinate, seeing his zombified friend in front of him. He became frantic, yelling that he needed to leave this place. As he rushed to the gate, he ran into Grover and Diesel, who quickly stopped him from leaving. Barrett scolded him, asking why he wanted to let go of the only experimental subject. Grover shouted at him to shut up his smelly mouth and told him to catch his own subject if he wanted one. Sean still tried to remove the wooden planks and break out, but Diesel knocked him out with a heavy punch. Unexpectedly, after a long time, Sean still showed no signs of waking up. Barrett worried that he might be turning into a freak. Zoe had no choice but to reveal that Sean had diabetes and needed regular insulin injections, which had run out that day. Natalie confirmed that diabetic patients could indeed experience hallucinations in the later stages, and that without timely insulin injections, their lives could be in danger. Grover suggested that there were thousands of storage lockers in the school building, and there might be insulin inside, so everyone split up and started searching for the medicine. Grover and Diesel went to the lockers on the first floor, but couldn't find any medicine after prying open all the lockers. However, they found a sibling photo in Mary's locker, making Grover feel even more sentimental. Diesel happened to find a bottle of liquor, and the two couldn't help but sit on the floor and drink together. Barrett didn't go to pry open lockers, but instead went to the principal's office. There, he finally found 2 insulin injections in a cabinet. However, he went to the bathroom and squeezed out most of the medicine before giving one injection to Zoe for the unconscious Sean. The other injection he secretly kept, likely as a bargaining chip for future transactions. With one injection, Sean finally woke up, and his crisis was temporarily resolved. Everyone was overjoyed, and Natalie prepared a rare feast for everyone to celebrate Sean's recovery. At the dinner table, everyone raised their glasses and apologized to each other. Violet wrote the names of the deceased students on the wall. The dead were gone, but the survivors should manage to survive well. These unfortunate kids, who had barely survived the freak crisis, had just regained some courage to continue fighting. Just then, the school building's water supply was cut off. Diesel tested all the faucets, but they all yielded the same result. The survivors calculated their remaining water supply, which was only enough for the 7 of them to drink for 3 days. Clearly, staying here any longer would be a death sentence. Grover found a solution. According to a newspaper article from the school years ago, there were gas masks stored in the newly built shelter. With those, they could venture outside to search for supplies. However, they had locked all the sick students in the shelter a few days prior, and now it was surely filled with freaks. Violet claimed she had a way to deal with them. Being well-versed in chemistry, she could create a sleeping gas to knock out the freaks. The catch was that she needed to go to the chemistry lab to gather some necessary materials. When Grover accompanied Violet to the hallway, they were suddenly blocked by a freak. They quickly locked the hallway door, but now they had a problem. The path to the lab was blocked by the freak. After brainstorming together, Violet came up with a plan. She decided to crawl through the ventilation ducts. Zoe, a former gymnast, volunteered to go with her. The 2 girls then entered the narrow ducts and, after a while, finally reached the area above the chemistry lab. After ensuring there was no danger below, Zoe took the lead and climbed out of the duct. Violet followed, and they hurriedly began collecting materials. Unexpectedly, the freak that had blocked their path earlier heard the noise and also entered the lab. It charged at the 2 girls, resulting in a fast and furious chase. In the end, Violet used a wooden spike to impale the freak, and the girls successfully completed their mission. Everyone couldn't help but cheer and celebrate their achievement. Violet then began mixing the chemicals. The sleeping gas was simply high-purity ether. It could render people unconscious and then settle on the floor's surface so anyone passing by wouldn't inhale the ether. While everyone was busy, they didn't realize the freak hadn't died but had crawled into the ventilation duct. Soon, Violet finished making the sleeping gas. Zoe was somewhat skeptical of its effectiveness and wondered if they should test it on someone. At that moment, Grover walked past Barrett's room and found him sneakily talking on a walkie-talkie. Furious, Grover dragged him in front of everyone and revealed that Barrett had been in contact with the outside world but had been hiding it from everyone. Barrett kept arguing that he had only just fixed the walkie-talkie. Enraged, Violet stood up and waved the gas under his nose, causing him to immediately pass out, and Diesel nearby also felt some mild effects. It proved that the gas was highly effective. Violet said that, given its concentration, those who were knocked out would wake up in about 20 minutes. However, Natalie thought Violet was being too reckless and shouldn't have used Barrett as a test subject. Violet ignored his bullshit and angrily left the scene. As she was about to search for gas masks in the shelter, Violet knew the journey would be extremely dangerous. She opened her phone and started recording her last words. It turned out that the chemical plant explosion that caused this disaster was indeed related to Violet. It's revealed that she had stolen materials from the lab, intending to blow up her scumbag boyfriend's car, unaware that he worked at the chemical plant and drove the car there. The explosion spread, causing an accident at the entire facility. Now Violet was filled with guilt and vowed to take responsibility for her actions. Soon after, Grover and the other 2 arrived at the entrance of the shelter. Inside were terrifying freaks. To get the gas masks, they would have to face another fierce battle. After carefully planning for some time, they confirmed their following tasks. Grover quietly unlocked the door, flung it open, while Sean immediately threw the custom-made gas inside before quickly closing the door again. Now, they just had to wait for the freaks to inhale the ether and become unconscious. Soon, there was silence inside the room. Violet reminded the 2 that the ether had settled on the floor, so it was safe to walk upright, but they shouldn't bend over. Grover and Sean silently entered the room, and indeed, all the freaks had collapsed on the floor. Violet stood guard at the door, ready to handle any emergency. As Grover rummaged through the shelves, he accidentally knocked over a cardboard box. Coincidentally, inside were the gas masks they had been searching for. Excited, Grover crouched down to pick them up, but forgot Violet's earlier warning and immediately passed out. Meanwhile, Barrett, who inhaled the ether, stirred, as if waking up. Seeing this, everyone realized that Violet's estimated 20-minute unconsciousness was too long. Natalie hurried to the basement to tell Violet the news. Violet reminded the two inside the room to leave. However, after calling out for a while, Grover was nowhere to be seen. The freaks lying on the floor started to wake up and were about to pounce on them. Sean had no choice but to pull Violet out of the shelter and lock the door behind them. Realizing they had forgotten Grover, Violet wanted to rush back in for him, but was stopped by Sean because it was too risky now. On the other side, Barrett had fully awakened. Diesel tried to contact the outside world using a walkie-talkie, but Barrett had tampered with it, making it impossible to connect. He pretended to be innocent, claiming Grover had misunderstood him. Just then, a noise came from the ventilation duct. Diesel picked up his phone and climbed up to take a look. As he turned around, a freak crawled over and fell down with him. Seeing the freak on top of Diesel, Barrett used an iron rod to knock it over. Everyone quickly ran into the room and locked the doors and windows. Zoe checked Diesel for injuries, but luckily he wasn't bitten by the freak. After the noise outside subsided, everyone left the room to check. Unexpectedly, the freak popped up again and chaos ensued. Barrett was tackled by the freak, but Zoe took out a dagger and stabbed the freak in the head, showing that the delicate young girl of the past could become a tough woman capable of killing freaks in just a few days. Meanwhile, Grover regained consciousness in the shelter, but just as he was about to make a move, the freaks detected his presence. He quickly crawled under a bed and then jumped onto a bunk bed, dodging the freaks while shouting for help in a chicken voice, causing the others outside to know that the chicken man Grover was still alive, and they decided to risk their lives to save him. Sean came up with a plan. He grabbed a chair to shield himself and pushed all the freaks to one side. Grover seized the opportunity to crawl out of the room. The others followed suit, locked the door, and rejoined him. Grover didn't forget to bring the gas masks, and although they encountered several mishaps along the way, the group of survivors finally achieved their goal. Now with the gas masks, they could venture outside to find a new place to settle. However, Diesel soon discovered that something was wrong. The gas masks' filters had been damaged from being stored for too long. After examining each one, they found that only one was barely usable. This meant that only one person could go outside to seek help. With the increased danger, everyone decided to draw lots to determine who would go, and Diesel was the chosen one. But he suffered from claustrophobia and struggled to breathe when wearing the gas mask. Barrett insisted that he couldn't go, and without waiting for everyone's agreement, drew another name from the box, and it showed the name was Zoe. But Barrett lied, claiming that it was Sean, Zoe's boyfriend. Barrett's sinister intentions were apparent. He had coveted Zoe and her hormones for a long time, and now he could finally get rid of her boyfriend. Sean then put on the protective suit and the gas mask. As Zoe watched with a reluctant gaze, he turned and walked out the door. The others inside the room watched his retreating figure. Suddenly, a freak poked its handsome head out and chased after Sean. Zoe shouted loudly from behind the door, but the walkie-talkie remained silent for a long time. She could only keep comforting herself that her boyfriend was still alive. Meanwhile, Grover and Violet worked together to seal off the ventilation ducts where freaks might appear. They then searched the building for any remaining freaks. As expected, they encountered a zombified teacher at the staircase. Grover and Violet quickly retreated into a storage room. Staring at the relentless freak outside, they decided to take a chance. Violet splashed sulfuric acid on the freak's body, hoping to dry it up into a mummy, and Grover took the opportunity to slash it down, finally eliminating the threat. On the other side, Zoe, who was still worried about her boyfriend's safety, finally received a message from him. It turned out that there were too many freaks in the vicinity, so he had turned off the walkie-talkie earlier. Sean had finally found an ambulance with its emergency lights flashing. As he approached to investigate, he discovered that all the medical staff had died tragically. He wanted to use the ambulance's radio to call for help when suddenly he was hit by a fierce blow. The walkie-talkie went silent, and it seemed that Sean's chances of survival were slim. Seizing the opportunity, Barrett pulled Zoe into his arms and comforted her using his skinny muscles. When the other survivors learned that Sean had failed to call for help, they decided to venture out together rather than die of thirst in their current location. As everyone was packing their belongings, Diesel and Natalie found a moment of respite heading to the building's lobby. Their mutual care and concern over the past few days had developed into affection. As they were expressing their hormone feelings, a bright light shone through the entrance, and a stranger in a protective suit knocked on the door. Gathering their courage, they let him in. The man introduced himself as John, claiming to be a rescue worker sent by the authorities. Upon learning that the students were thirsty, he radioed his colleagues open the water valves in the area where the school was located. John explained that he had found them after receiving Barrett's radio call for help earlier. After everyone enjoyed fresh water again, they had no doubt about John's identity as a rescuer and were grateful to Barrett as well. John informed everyone that the authorities had developed a vaccine to resist the toxic freak fog. As long as everyone received the injection, they could leave with him to go to a rescue station. Barrett was skeptical about this claim. If there was a vaccine, why would John still wear a protective suit when he entered? John's explanation was somewhat evasive, saying he had been outside for 2 days, and the suit was just to isolate dust like a giant condom. The others found this reasonable and were overjoyed at the prospect of a new beginning. Violet and Grover in particular cherished the difficult experiences they had gone through, and they established a romantic relationship. Natalie accidentally saw Barrett sneakily doing something and approached to find that he was actually deleting records of the intrusion into the chemical plant's defense system. Barrett said it was a matter of great importance and asked her to keep it a secret, but Natalie ignored his plea and reported the suspicious Barrett to John. John thought this was a serious issue and immediately checked the room, only to find that the computer data had been destroyed and Barrett had disappeared. Grover went to search for him. Finally, in an office, he found Barrett in a hurry, holding a vial of vaccine. Under Grover's questioning, Barrett eventually confessed the truth. It turns out he was a computer hacker who had previously used the radio to contact other hackers, planning to infiltrate the chemical plant's database. They all suspected that there was something fishy about the explosion and that there was something off about John, the rescuer. It was impossible for any vaccine to be developed in just a few days. To prove his point, Barrett injected the vaccine, which he had stolen from John, into a guinea pig. But after waiting for a long time, the guinea pig showed no negative reaction to the drug. Grover had no patience to wait any longer and insisted on regrouping with the others. The two men had just stepped out when they encountered a freak, forcing them to run in separate directions. Surprisingly, the freak kept chasing Grover relentlessly. Just as he was desperately resisting, a gunshot rang out, and the freak fell to the ground, shot. It turned out that John had arrived just in time. While he was preparing to inject the vaccine into everyone, he realized that one vial was missing and knew that it was Barrett's doing. He instructed everyone to stay put and rushed off to find him, eventually saving Grover, who was under attack by the freak. John hurriedly asked if Grover had seen Barrett. Grover felt gratitude towards John for saving his life, so he helped John search for Barrett. When the two arrived at the room where Barrett had been conducting experiments, they discovered that the guinea pig that had been injected with the vaccine was now lifeless. Grover then realized Barrett was telling the truth, and John was up to no good. Grover wanted to sneak away and inform everyone of the news, but as soon as he opened the door, he saw Barrett already on the ground, unconscious. Grover was then knocked out by John with a single blow. When he woke up again, he found himself and Barrett tied up in a small room. Barrett told Grover that he had once hacked into the chemical plant's information database and discovered that they were conducting a secret experiment. The zombie gas leak may have been related to this. Barrett speculated that John was sent by the chemical plant to eliminate everyone in order to cover up their crimes. The reason they were able to locate them must have been because they intercepted the radio used by Barrett. After hearing this, Grover realized that Violet and the others were in imminent danger. He then used his skills to break free from the ropes. After that, he hurried to find his companions. At that time, the other survivors believed that John was the long-awaited rescue personnel, and they began to willingly receive the vaccine he brought. Natalie was overjoyed as she was the first to complete the injection. Just as it was Zoe's turn, Grover finally arrived, striking John with a stick and shouting that it was a deadly poison. Natalie was in shock as she helplessly looked towards her new boyfriend, Diesel. Now, the only way for the group was to tie up the mastermind and ask if there was an antidote. John constantly claimed that it was not poison, and Natalie clung to hope, saying she felt no abnormalities. Diesel then took out a vial of the substance, suggesting that if it wasn't harmful, they should try it on John. As a result, John immediately backed down and admitted that he was sent to silence the students, who had witnessed the chemical plant explosion. Violet asked if there was a cure for the injected poison, but John replied that only by sending her back to the headquarters for medical treatment could she be saved. Diesel angrily injected John with a dose, insisting that sending Natalie away would be like sending a lamb to the slaughter. Heartbroken, Diesel could not face the dying Natalie and decided to stay behind and guard John, unaware that John was preparing to cut through the tape on his hands with a hidden blade. Grover and Barrett searched John's backpack for useful clues. Inside, they found a work ID from the chemical plant, confirming Barrett's suspicions that John was not a rescuer. Grover also discovered a card with instructions to bring back the target person. After reading it, he hastily pocketed the card. Noticing nothing else, Grover and Violet decided to question John again, but when they returned to the hall, they found he had disappeared. The two followed traces to the end of the corridor, where they found Diesel sitting weakly on the floor. Just minutes earlier, the bound John had been taunting Diesel, saying Natalie was dying, and all he could do was sit there. Enraged, Diesel stood up to teach John a lesson, but as he approached, the now free John suddenly attacked, grabbing Diesel's arm and striking it until he dropped his gun. Knowing he was outmatched, Diesel fled, but was shot by John. Fortunately, before leaving, Diesel had taken John's protective suit, preventing him from leaving and seeking reinforcements. Natalie carefully bandaged Diesel's wound, which seemed not fatal, ensuring his temporary safety. He told everyone that John's gun only had 4 bullets left, and Grover believed they could fight back with their numbers. Barrett hid the protective suit, while Grover and Violet went to confront John. Their plan seemed perfect at first. Grover relied on John's reluctance to kill him and drew his attention, while Violet attempted a sneak attack. However, John managed to capture Violet and forced Grover to retrieve the protective suit in exchange for the hostage. On the other side, Diesel isn't feeling any better either. Just a moment ago, Natalie suddenly started bleeding from her nose. There's no doubt that the poison inside her has started to take effect. Natalie feels reluctant. She just got together with Diesel, and now they have to part forever. Diesel keeps comforting her using both words and muscles, reminding her of the beautiful memories they've shared. He then joins forces with others to put on protective suits and prepare to exchange Violet with John. This man keeps his promise and releases Violet after receiving the protective suits. But it's not that he doesn't want to shoot, but the bullets in his gun aren't enough to kill the people in front of him. John comes to a safe room filled with freaks, quietly unlocking the door and tossing away a cylinder. The noise immediately attracts the freaks. Before leaving, he leaves this gift for Grover and the others. Little does he know that the students aren't planning on waiting for death. As John approaches the freak-infested school building, his protective suit suddenly emits a beeping sound. This is a device that Grover secretly installed on the suit earlier. The pleasant beeping attracts all the nearby freaks. Poor John is inevitably killed by the swarm of freaks. Inside the school building, Diesel and Natalie are bidding their final farewells, while Grover and the others worry about their current situation. Suddenly, noises come from the basement. It turns out that all the freaks from the shelter have rushed upstairs. Caught off guard, Grover and the others have no choice but to fight the freaks hand to hand. But there are too many freaks, so they temporarily take refuge in a classroom. Just as the freaks are about to break in, Natalie, who was resting in another room, suddenly appears. She desperately makes noise to attract the freaks outside the door. Knowing that her life is nearing its end, she decides to sacrifice herself to give her companions a chance to escape. Grover holds back Diesel, who wants to fight to the death, and they escape the freak-filled corridor in immense grief. They watch as Natalie sacrifices herself for them, leaving everyone in despair. Grover feels the most guilt because he knows that John wasn't targeting everyone present, but only himself, as indicated on his mission card. That explains why he hit it quickly earlier when he saw it. While Barrett is comforting a heartbroken Zoe, her boyfriend Sean suddenly returns. His face, however, looks strange, and he says that they followed him here and he had no choice. Several figures can be seen moving outside the school building, obviously trying to break in. The story then goes back 48 hours earlier. Sean, who was searching for help outside, accidentally discovered a walkie-talkie in an ambulance. Just as he was about to make contact, he was suddenly attacked by freaks. Fortunately, he is a good fighter and manages to eliminate the freaks. Sean quickly starts the ambulance and races to the police station, where he finds that the place hasn't been overrun. He uses his last ounce of strength to run inside and shouts for help before passing out. When he wakes up 12 hours later, a woman dressed as a policewoman tells him that he had fainted due to severe dehydration and high blood sugar, but he's fine now. Sean hurriedly tells her that his friends are still in the school waiting for rescue. The policewoman is delighted to learn that there are 6 survivors without weapons in the school and promises to send help immediately. Sean is puzzled as to why the policewoman would leave and lock him in a room. Driven by curiosity, Sean easily picks the lock and begins exploring the place. He bypasses the office area and goes upstairs, where he sees doctors performing human experiments and even a torture room. Sean senses that something is wrong. This place isn't an ordinary police station. He then sneaks into an empty room filled with personal items and finds his gas mask. He puts on the protective gear and escapes the police station. Meanwhile, the policewoman discovers Sean's disappearance and starts searching for him. She soon spots him fleeing and follows him. As Sean safely returns to the school building, he unknowingly leads this group of unidentified armed personnel to the location. Barrett realizes that something is wrong and tells everyone to hide. Strangely, the lights outside the door only flicker before disappearing. Barrett speculates that the intruders are assessing the situation and will break in once they have all the information. He blames Sean for exposing their location, but Sean argues that he just wanted to get back to them sooner. Zoe interrupts and tells Barrett to find Grover and the others first. Sean vented his frustration on Zoe again because when he just returned, he saw her hugging Barrett. Zoe explained that she was only seeking comfort due to the sadness of her friend's death, which finally dispelled Sean's resentment. In the classroom, Grover and Violet discovered that this group of outsiders were wandering around the school building. Instead of forcing their way through the main entrance, they chose to sneak in from the side door. It was too late for Grover and others to escape when they became aware of this, so they hurriedly hid in a lab. However, the policewoman quickly searched the lab. Sean stood up and surrendered to protect his companions. When questioned by the policewoman, Sean claimed that he hadn't found his companions since he returned. The policewoman was not so easily fooled and connected to the school's broadcast system to interrogate Sean. Unable to bear the screams, Zoe wanted to rescue him, but Grover stopped her, emphasizing the need for strategy. At this point, Barrett said he had a plan. Barrett and Grover used the terrain to their advantage, luring an intruder to a designated location. Then Grover appeared, attracting the intruder's attention with his status as the target. Diesel attacked from behind, killing the intruder. However, the disappearance of her henchman soon aroused the policewoman's suspicion. She learned from another man that the target had not been found on the upper floors, so she took Sean to the location where the dead henchman had been patrolling, only to find him being eaten by a freak. This was actually a setup by Grover and his friends to make the policewoman believe they were not in the school building. The trick worked, and the policewoman thought she had completed her task. She broke Sean's leg, attracting nearby freaks with his screams. She then left the school building with her henchmen, reporting to the headquarters that the school had been cleared. Although Grover and his friends escaped once again, the unfortunate Sean was in danger. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.